Welcome to Nothing to Be Found. I'm Samuel, and today we're going to go through a topic that most of us would rather swerve, and that's death. Because our culture keeps death tucked away like it's some uninvited guest. But the thing is, what if death isn't something to fear? What if it's just another breath out? What if getting close to death, like really sitting with it, could help us to live just that little bit more freely? So, in this episode, I'm going to share some personal stories. I'm going to share some memories from my childhood, some memories from reckless weekends away, and then I'm going to share some real losses that probably helped shape me. We're going to explore some yogic philosophy around death and impermanence. And of course, I'm going to share some tools to help soften the fear and maybe bring you a little bit closer to the presence that lives beneath it. So my early perspectives on death. So when I was little, death was like a ghost story. I'd go on dog walks with my nan and granddad, and they lived near a cemetery, and they told the best ghost stories. And so death felt like something eerie, something that was always out there, something that was mystical. And then came school. And the schools I went to were all Church of England schools. So the assemblies and all that were always based around Christianity, heaven and hell. And then death was always somewhere else again. Like it was somewhere that we might get to if we behaved. And it was still not something you could feel. It was this abstract thing. But my first real experience came with my great granddad. And I think it was the smell that stuck with me. And I can remember the smell of the care home. It just stank of like piss. And there was this like sterile sadness all about it. So we visited him. And then one day he was gone. That was it. No like big conversation, just this absence. And there was probably like the murmurings of like, he's in a better place now, he's in heaven, but there was no like big discussion or anything that I can remember. And then a little bit later, when I was around the age of 7, I moved in with my stepfamily, and my stepdad's previous wife had killed herself. She committed suicide. And I remember my mum telling me that that's what happened to her, but it was like it was never really discussed or spoken about in the house as a family. It was just like, again, this thing that was avoided. Maybe that was just because it wasn't really fuck all to do with me. It was none of my business. And then the next death that was relevant in my life was a mate of mine. He drowned in a quarry. So Ben, he drowned, we was probably maybe 16, I'm guessing. But that hit differently because it wasn't just a story. That was real. It was the wake-up call to my immortality. So it was like death had turned up, and it was the first time I really realized that this could happen to me. Like I could just not exist. And I used to think that not existing was fucking terrifying. Like I used to dread death. I just couldn't wrap my head around not existing. It made me feel small, terrified, and just completely out of control. And then when I started meditating, I thought the goal was to silence everything and to push fear away. But slowly through practice, through sitting, breathing, reading, I started to feel something different. Not as a theory, but more as a lived thing. And something I realized was this, is that death is a part of every breath. That every inhale begins, every exhale ends, and there's something deeper that holds it all. Like each moment is a rebirth and a death, constant change. And non-dual teachings help me in this area a lot, especially the headless way. If I look for myself, I just can't find one. There's nothing to be found. At center, there is absolutely nothing. It's just this space where experience appears and then disappears. Because the self is not something that's solid, and if there is no permanent self, then what is there to die? In recent years, there's been 3 significant losses in my life, and there's some lessons attached to these. So in a short period of time, the first one to pass was my nan, and I'd visit her in her final days. And her last 2 weeks of life was like this slow decline, but she was ready to go. And her death in the end felt like this soft exile, where all suffering was just released. And it was this death that was met with acceptance. I asked her, I said, Nan, did it feel like 80 something years? And she said, did it how? Like, it felt it went by so quick, she said. But she knew it was time and she accepted it. And then not long after this, a dear friend of mine, a mentor, motivator, Marky B, died. And he was gone suddenly. And that death felt like a punch. But at the same time, it moved me and gave me clarity. It pushed me to book my yoga teacher training. And his death reminded me that life is short. So do what matters. And then the final one, which came shortly after this, was my mother-in-law, Myra, which we spoke about on last week's episode, and delivering her eulogy. So Myra had pancreatic cancer, weeks to live, but refused to accept it right up to the end. And death came anyway, but there was resistance for it the whole way. And this contrast struck me, how some death is met with surrender, yet others fight it with every breath. And this reminds me a little bit of a near-death experience that I had in Ibiza. It was back in 2016, and back then I was reckless with my life. And this is probably around the time just before my sort of yogic journey started. And I was 2 days into a bender, no sleep, and I triple dropped on the beach on a hot Ibiza morning, dehydrated, lost, heart palpitating, and I thought, this might be it. You've really gone and fucked yourself this time. And then a friend of mine, he turned to me and he said some of the realest words I think I've ever heard. It was, if you're going to die, then you're going to die. There's fuck all you can do about it. And somehow I felt peace hearing those words. Like no panic. It was those words that just brought this surrender. And at the time, I remember thinking of my son, like not in fear, but more with this softness. Like if this is it, then so be it. And even like repeating these words now, like on a podcast, it sounds really fucked up and selfish of me. But in that moment, if this was to be it, it was it. There was really nothing I could do about it. But then there was a apartment right behind us called Jet Apartments, and they had a big swimming pool. So we had the idea, go jump in the pool. The skin is the biggest organ on the body, and hydrating myself through the skin, I would say, is probably what saved my life. Either that or I'm just being really melodramatic. But the real gift was the moment before, that letting go and being able to see with clarity, aparigraha, the letting go, and Ishwara pranidhana, the surrender. And all that being said, I think the biggest lessons on death and impermanence is that everything is transient. Thoughts, feelings, bodies, identities, all like the weather, ever changing, never ours to keep. Because the self is just this bundle of habits and memories. We can't be what we can observe. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, you are not what you think you are. And it's right. We're not what we think we are. We think we are this false self, this false identity. But when we are able to rest as awareness itself, then we can realize that death is just another movement in consciousness. So now for the part where I give you some practical tools for embracing death. So I've written down 5, and the first one is meditation, especially practices like in Dzogchen or the Headless Way, self-inquiry, direct paths, really glimpsing into our true nature as awareness rather than this consistent identity that we carry through life. I find that once we recognize our true nature, we let go of this whole concept of death. And then the second one is breath work. This one, like if fear arises within you, then there are practices that can anchor you in the moment, that your breath can bring you back, whether that be 4, 6, 8 breathing pattern. But the breath is a powerful tool as an anchor to bring you back into the present moment without the mind wandering off into the fear of the unknown. And then number 3, journaling. If you write your fears out, give them shape, they lose their power. They lose their hold on you. And another really powerful practice is to write your own eulogy. Not so much in accepting death, but like more as a tool to how to live. And when you write a eulogy, it's usually the shit that we always get wrapped up in, like performances at work and stuff like that. They're never really on there. That's not the things that matter. And when we write our eulogy, write it from the perspective of a family member, a work colleague, someone in the community. There's tools online of like how to do this, but it really helps you get a clear picture of a proper way for you to conduct and live your life. Number 4 is mindful movement. Yoga, qigong, whatever, just something that can allow you to be fully present in the body and embody the full experience. Because as I said at the beginning, like the Christian teachings of death is all very much in the abstract and it's always there. But if we can bring ourselves back to here and truly ground ourselves in the moment and know that there's nothing lacking in this moment, there is nothing to fear, there's nothing to resist. Life is unfolding just as it should be. It can alleviate any fear around death, I guess. And then the 5th one is reading. Read books, whether it be fiction or non-fiction, around the subject, around the topic. And yeah, that's my 5 tips. So we don't need to chase mystical experiences. We just need to practice and stay with what's real, because every breath is a death. Every moment is a moment passing. Everything you love will change. Everything you fear will also change. But what you are, awareness itself, it never dies. And when we can stop resisting the impermanence, then it can allow us to start living with truth. And death is the only truth. And in truth, there is peace. So thank you for listening. If something in this episode resonated, then share it with someone. Let this conversation keep unfolding, because death will come. But fear, it's optional. So sit with these questions, breathe with them, live like it matters, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, there's absolutely nothing to be found.